Hello, and today kickstarts a new series of videos where I want to look at WD-RED drives. I want to look at the older generation that uses conventional magnetic recording and compare it against the newer generation of WD-RED drives that feature drive-managed shingled magnetic recording. So today we're going to start with RAID building. Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk to you guys about WD-RED hard drives. I predominantly want to talk about the WD-RED 4TB drive. Now, I have talked about WD-RED NAS hard drives for quite a long time on this channel. They were one of the first to get on board with the idea of hard drives being designed for NAS servers, predominantly 24/7, kind of random read-write access and RAID utilization. But in recent times, their range has really grown into a number of different models, not just by different drives for different utilizations, but also pro versus consumer and even different variants within subcategories. One classic example being the WD-RED 4TB, available in the WD-40EFRX, the older of the two, and the newer 4TB WD-40EFAX. Moving forward, I'm going to refer to this as the RX and the AX drive. Now, maybe you're trying to start your journey in the world of network attached storage for the first time, or you're looking at these drives and wondering what the difference is between them, because there is a slight, and I do mean slight, price difference between them, with the AX being a pinch more expensive. And of course, some of you may have come to this video because of recent discussions surrounding WD-RED and the utilization of DMSMR, that's Drive Managed Shingled Magnetic Recording. You can check out WD's own statement on it right here. I'm going to reserve judgment on this completely in this video because I've already made a bit of content about that. And today's video serves as part one of two, where I'm going to be utilizing both variants of standard class WD-RED 4TB drives. I've got them installed inside a Synology DS918 Plus and a QNAP TS453BE, and I've got them installed inside all four of these NASes. I've got four of the RX drives in this Synology, four of the RX drives inside this QNAP, and then exactly the same variants of QNAP and Synology, I have got the the AX drives inside these two. And what we're going to do today is we're going to do, for our first video, a RAID build. We're going to use these two systems here, and we're going to build a RAID on them at exactly the same time from Synology and QNAP. And then we're going to do the same RAID rebuild, both of them on RAID 5, and both of them using ext4 as the file system. And we're going to see if both sets of 4TB drives build their RAID at a similar rate. In the next video, we're then going to pull one of the drives from these array and introduce a brand new drive, not reintroduce the old drive because we don't want to factor in resilvering too much here. And we're going to see how long it takes both of these systems to do a RAID rebuild. And what we hope to see by the end of these two videos is to find out just how good the drives compare. Are they identical, or are we seeing a slight performance improvement in one over the other? And the reason we're using two different NAS brands is just to give us a better field of capture overall between them. Now, a RAID 5 rebuild on these NASes that have got the same CPU inside will presumably take a similar amount of time, but both of them will take overnight. For a RAID 5 with 4TBs, we are looking at least 12 hours at least for a RAID like this to be completed. So I'm going to film the beginning of this today on the 22nd of April, and I'm going to fast forward to tomorrow once this is complete. I'll probably not be here for the completion of this, but the logs should tell us about when this RAID was completed and when it was started and when it was completed. But I've used up enough of your time here. Let's take a good look at how these go forward. So let's start building our RAID. We're going to start with the Synology and the RXs inside. So we're going to go into that storage pool and we're going to create our RAID 5 storage pool. RAID 5, RAID 5. There's our four drives all being utilized there. Once again, these are the RX drives. Clicking forward, take a note of the time. The logs will tell us about how long this takes. So it doesn't matter too much about how much time I take to do this. We're going to wait until that's completed and we're going to move on to the next one. So again, what we'll do to keep this fair, we'll do the two Synologies and then the two QNAPs. So next we'll go into the storage pool there. And we're going to carry on building our RAID 5. Now, the more astute of you may have noticed that there's a slight lag here while I'm working. Because of self-isolation and the recent changes in the way people work during COVID, I am conducting this video remotely with all 4 of these NASes in a different location to myself. I'm being ably assisted by my colleague Richard, and he will help us along the way with regards to the second part of this video. But if there's a slight delay in my actions talking against what I'm doing on screen, that's why. So we've done the 2 Synologies, now we'll move on to the QNAPs. The QNAPs, here we're going with the RX QNAP here. We're going to go into and build our new RAID array. We're going to go into storage there, create our new storage pool. And again, we've got a few more options here, but we're going to go just with the default options to make sure all of this is nice and straightforward. We're going for a RAID 5. We're not going to have a hot spare. And we're going to leave the alert threshold such as it is and carry on moving forward. It's going to wipe those drives out and it's going to start building our RAID. Once that screen's done, I'll make our way over to the second QNAP. So do factor in that because of the staggered way in which I'm starting the RAID build on this, there will be a slight discrepancy of around, I'd say, 3 to 5 minutes if all of these NASes were completed at identical times. So do bear that in mind. Whilst that begins the operation there, let's flick over to the AX QNAP there. I do apologise, I keep making that slip up. And start the RAID 5 configuration on this one. Move into there. We're going to start our new storage pool. We're not going to worry too much about volumes for now. Once again, using all of those AX drives in our RAID 5 array. And again, RAID 5. We're going to have that 80% threshold again. Double check that's all right and click create. And there you go. We've now begun our RAID configuration on these 2 platforms. Now, as mentioned, to monitor this, and I'm sure the network activity is probably quite busy right now, we are going to rely quite substantially on the log of both of these devices to tell us lots of information about how and when things are completed. This will tell us a lot more about how long the RAIDs have taken, and obviously when we do the RAID rebuild, when we pull a drive, that will factor in as well. So I'm going to leave the log open on both of these devices, and it's going to continue to build that in the background. We're not going to build a volume just yet. We're going to leave that there, and we're going to go in. It's synchronizing right now in the background. And if we go up here, we'll be able to see the performance there of that RAID 5 storage pool being created. And the other one's probably just on its way and almost about to trigger while it's creating that RAID there in the background. Again, on the other Synology, we'll get the log open there for us on screen. I do apologise if there's any lag while I'm doing this on screen. And again, we'll scroll on down and we'll probably find the log. I've just got to remember where it is on the QNAP. I think it's in the resource monitor. And again, we're not going to create a volume on that storage space. We're just focusing right now on the RAID. Later on, of course, we may well start focusing on a volume if we start to do performance testing, maybe some IOPS stuff, and just to see how this runs. But for now, we can take a quick note at that time there. It's 12:45 here at remote access, and we've got our 4 NASes building their RAID as we speak. And again, there's the percentage grade there of the whole thing happening with synchronization. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back to this device, all 4 of these devices, tomorrow to see their RAIDs completed and just to see how long these individual RAIDs have taken on their respective 4 TB drives from WD-RED. So let's fast forward to tomorrow. Right, so here we are, just over 24 hours later, so we can check out exactly how our Synology and QNAP NASes with their own respective WD hardware inside have performed. Right, first and foremost, we can look at the RX918, so RX being the EFRX. It's been 24 hours for me, but it's been mere seconds for you. And we can see that our RAID 5 was completed in around 8 hours 38 minutes. We can see that it kicked off there, originally kicking off at around 11:41 and closing that evening around 20 past 8 p.m. So same day, but finished up there in the evening. As for the QNAP, with exactly the same format media, once again the WD40EFRX. If we go into the logs, we can see that the QNAP took a fraction longer. It took around 8 hours to be completed. We can see that it started the storage pool at 12:44 and completed at 8:44. Although it is worth highlighting that there does seem to be a slight hiccup on my part during the setup with regard to setting up daylight savings time. So as you can see at the bottom there, it started at 12, even though if you remember from the original recording, that time wasn't spot on there. But it's still like for like, and it took around 8 hours. I think it was fractionally over 8 and a second. Now, if we compare the Synology DS918 that we use with the older generation 4TB WD Reds and the QNAP with that same media, we can compare it against the newer gen 4TB WD Reds, the EFAX drives. Now, the Synology, the RAID 5, was completed in an impressive 5 hours, 8 minutes. Now, remember, the previous generation drives took 8 hours, 38 minutes. And if we scroll down, we can see that it kicked off, as before, around about 11:42 and completed at 4:50 p.m. So it took a considerably less time. And in the end, it did make a noticeable difference in terms of overall performance, and we'll go to the results in just a moment. If we look at the QNAP, once again, exactly the same thing. With the AX drives installed, it went from that original 8 hours that the RX drives took to now around 6 hours, 5 minutes, with the RAID 1 beginning at 12:45 and ending there in the evening at 6:50 on the nose. So a huge difference there in terms of overall. And if we look at the notes that I've made just before the start of this video, we can see that the older generation drives took 8 hours and around about half an hour difference between them, between the Synology and the QNAP. And in the case of the newer generation WD drives, we can see a noticeable difference there of around about an hour, how long each one took to do it. Now, do bear in mind there are certain factors between the Synology and the QNAP. The QNAP arriving with 4 gig of memory and, the Synology arriving with 4 gig of DDR3L memory and the QNAP arriving with 2 gig. So do bear that in mind about the difference between those two brands. But the real thing we want to talk about is the difference between the new drive and the old drive. And we can see that in the case of the Synology, the newer generation drives built that RAID 40% quicker. And remember, that was an identical NAS on an identical network with exactly the same build. Neither one of them was using RAID resync or RAID improved speed, but it is worth highlighting that Synology arrives with this feature by default enabled at a higher level than the QNAP, which is another reason to explain the difference in RAID completion times between the two brands. But even on the QNAP, we can see that using the newer generation drives, the 4TB WD Red AX drives, it was still 24% faster on this QNAP than it was on this QNAP. Now, there are lots of reasons that this could be the case. Before we get too hasty and heavy about this, one of the immediate differences between the EFRX drive and the EFAX drive is caching. This drive released a noticeable time in terms of years before this drive reached the market, arrived with 64 megabytes of cache. So it's worth mentioning that 64 megabytes of cache, as good as it was at the time, does pale in comparison to the 256 megabytes of drive cache on the newer drive, and that will make a difference. The workload on both of them of 180 terabytes per year is the same, and they both clock up, according to the WD specs, over up to 600,000 cycles on those drives. And although both of them arrive with the same RPM at 5400, it is worth mentioning that the newer drive is probably benefiting from newer generation actuator technology with the ARM, as well as platter research as well. So these things can all play their part. And if you look at the official specs, you can see that the older generation drive arrives with a 150 megabytes per second read-write reported. But the newer generation drive arrives with 180 megabytes per second read-write speed reported maximum. The result being that this is a result of innovations on that new drive. Now, I know a number of you in the comments are going to highlight things like drive managed shingled magnetic recording, as we've mentioned at the beginning of this video. We're going to reserve full judgment until the end of all of these tests. We do have a bunch more tests to do, and the next video after this is going to be our RAID rebuild test. We're going to rip a drive of all 4 of these NASes to see what happens and how long the RAID rebuild is going to take on all of these systems. Bear in mind, of course, the Synology is going to be a bit quicker than the QNAP because of the difference in memory and architecture on these devices, but what we're really looking at is how this Synology compares with this Synology and this QNAP compares with this QNAP. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. Do click subscribe to stay abreast of this series of videos and know when the next part's going to be live, as well as clicking like if you enjoyed the video to keep me going. And of course, visit the guys at Span.com, NAS experts, over 25 years in the biz. They know how to help. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.